Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week I'm going to be restoring this vintage Raleigh Wayfarer. I'm going to take you step by step through the whole process and show you how I fixed all the problems on this bike. Almost nothing worked when it came in, and as you can see it's in a state of total disrepair and neglect. It's covered in rust, everything is seized, and we've got quite the challenge ahead. It had been sitting for around 5 years before we got it to resurrect. As you can see here, we've got a lot of problems with the pedals. There's a lot of play in these. These are actually unusual. I'll show you that as we're going. A little bit of an unusual oddity to those pedals that I hadn't seen before. You can see the front wheel is absolutely on its last legs. The bearings were all over the place. The tensions on the wheel were all over the place. It had a flat tyre. It was going no further than that. You can see here the left-hand brake lever, no cable in there at all. There's a little fitting that should be on the end here as well to support the cable. That's missing, so we'll need to find one of those and make sure that we get a new cable to make the brake work. And you can see here also one pedal arm was completely loose on the shaft. The cotter pin in there completely had it. Be a very tricky ride if you're riding this down the road with that pedal flapping around. So we need to make a start on this bike, so we'll begin off by taking the components off of the frame. Initially, we've got a lot of seized components. You can see here this support clip for the chain guard was not turning at all. I couldn't get that started at all, and so began the journey of how this bike is for taking apart and fixing, and we're going to solve all the problems. So easiest thing for me to do here was to get a grinder in there and cut that one. Don't generally like to do that. We usually try to solve the seized nuts and bolts, but it was so tight in there was no room other than to get a grind wheel in there, so we'll take that one off and replace that as we go. So off comes the rear one. Thankfully that did undo, and off comes that chain guard. That reveals everything we need to see on the main group set there, so that will make it easier to get everything apart and give us a little bit of freedom around the area. But first thing I need to do is get this old clip off that we've cut off. So although I ground it off, I couldn't get a saw in to actually saw the bolt that was holding it together. So there we go, that's apart now, and that comes off, and we'll just replace that with a replacement part. Now, no need for us to measure this chain. I can quite clearly see, as you can here, that it is absolutely stretched to its maximum. It has had it. You can see how it's slack on the bike, where over the time it's never been adjusted, and I think that's a tale of this bike. As these sort of bikes get older, the maintenance on them gets less and less, and eventually they get to the stage where they're just hanging in there for survival, and their bikes end up in this tired, sad old state. And we're going to actually solve all the problems, but one of the things we are going to do is replace that chain. Off comes the front wheel, and then this was also seized. This is the adjuster for the rear internal 3-speed Sturmey Archer hub. That was seized. The hub itself wasn't changing gear, so we'll get all that apart as well and solve the problems that are there. So off come the little adjusters there. Off comes the wheel now, so the wheel nuts are undoing, and that will enable us to get to that hub and begin to solve the problems with that. Next up, the pedals. So the right hand one came off nice and easy. That was fairly straightforward. However, the left hand pedal was a wrestling match. It certainly needed a lot of strength, and I really struggled to get that pedal off the arm. It was a wrestle. Every turn, every thread was a wrestle to get that off, but we did manage to get it undone, and when we actually put it back on, it spun on beautifully just by cleaning up all these threads. So using a little bit of penetrating oil there, you'll see that a few times along the way with this particular job. It was pretty tough, that one. You can see I'm getting an arm workout there. It's arm day here. You can see also that pedal arm floating and moving around where that cotter pin has had it on that one. That didn't help because I couldn't really lever against the right hand pedal arm. But that's off, so now we need to get the chain set itself off. So we'll undo the bolt to the cotter pin first, give that a little tap. As often is the case with cotter pins, it made no difference at all. So the only thing for me to do was just to grind the threads that are left off so they don't bend right over. And then I can put a bit of heat onto this. And again, I made a bit of a mistake here. I warmed this up so much that you'll see in a second when I get hold of it at the top, it was a little bit too hot to handle. So I had to get a rag to take away some of the heat. So I was holding the chain set there. It was a bit too hot. Little rag on there, and then I can knock that through with a chisel and a heavy hammer, but again we've got no movement there at all. So the next stage after this is to drill out that cotter pin. That would not have moved as it was. You could put that on any manner of the tricks that we're told in the comments regularly, but that is not going to move without being drilled out. So we're going to drill through the cotter pin. That will actually give it movement. The drill won't go and touch the axle itself because that's a much harder steel than the cotter pin. So with a little bit of help with Simon here appearing on camera, we can actually now knock that out with a chisel once we've drilled through it, and out it comes. So quite easy to get out once you've drilled it through. And that will then allow me to get the chain set off of the axle, so off that comes there from the main bottom bracket. You can see here where I've drilled that through how that sloping edge of the cotter pin that does all that gripping is now enables us to give a little bit of movement there to knock it out, and the threads have completely gone from one end as well with the drilling out process. So that's how we managed to get out cotter pins as stubborn as this one is. They do take a little bit of work, but they will come out, and you can see there no damage to the actual chain set itself, no damage to the actual bottom bracket. We can put fresh cotter pin in and everything there will be okay. Same principle on the left hand one, give it a tap. That actually for us is fortunate in that this one did actually knock out, as you would expect a cotter pin to when they're not seized in, but obviously we did have the movement in this arm, so we had to chisel this one out, but it did come out without drilling out, and I'll show you that now, why we've got the movement in the arm on this cotter pin when it is still so tight. And you can see here that slope runs up to the top, then we've got this V channel in here. That's where the movement has gradually worn that cotter pin out. And again, if this bike had been took in as soon as there was any movement, it's a serviceable item, we could have replaced that cotter pin and you wouldn't have had the movement. But obviously this bike is decades old and has had very little maintenance over that time, and that's a telltale sign of a rider who's just put up with a problem until eventually they can ride the bike no further. Next up, I'm going to take the bottom bracket out. Now you will not believe the amount of grease inside here, so I'm going to actually put a fitting in here to remove the right hand cup so as I can show you that. So I put this through the axle and tighten it up. You can see there it's got a massive washer on one side, but it nicely supports my spanner for getting that right hand cup out. They're notoriously difficult to get out, but I've found with this system I never have one now that doesn't come out, and it makes it a lot easier to service the threads, service the bottom of the frame and the bottom bracket itself if we can get all that out. So that's why I've done that now. Check out this grease that's in this bottom bracket, over greased, way too much. You've only got bearings in there. This is absolutely chocker with a grease fill up. So you can see there all that's going to do is fill the bottom bracket with a substance that will just go thicker and thicker and make it harder and harder to ride. That is not lubricating the bearings at all because it's behind them, so totally unnecessary. And you'll also see here in the cups themselves, removing the bearings there with a magnet just saves me having to get my fingers in there as well. So out come the bearings, and then I can just scrape out that excess grease that is in these cups as well, which is thickened off. It was actually not spinning that nicely, that bottom bracket, because of this thickness of grease and goop and debris that was inside. So I'm going to remove everything off this frame. So off comes this kickstand here as well. You can see how much debris is in that area there. I'm also going to remove the mud guards because these stays for the mud guards were quite twisted and they didn't look very nice, and obviously we've taken the brakes off. We don't want that mud guard hanging down, so we'll also remove the mud guard at this stage. So off comes that rear mud guard there, along with the brake caliper, which I'm now removing. That's come off nicely, and then there's actually a clip down the bottom of this as well, which we had to undo, and that slips off as well. Front brake caliper, same principle as the rear, but obviously this one did have a cable in it, so we need to cut that old cable off and also release that brake, and then we can take that and the mud guard off of the front. So out comes the old cable there from the top of the brake caliper. Lay that down and remove that as we go. Again, these stays for the mud guard are very bent and twisted, so we can reshape those when it's on the bench, which we will show you. And off comes the front caliper and mud guard. You can see here the dirt, the years of dirt build up on the back of that caliper. It's amazing how these components clean up once they are cleaned up, because you remove all that debris, get the shine back in them, and they really look completely different once they go back on the bike. Off comes that little fit in there for the rear internal hub cable. Clips that are along the frame, we'll take all those off, we'll clean all those up. Very time consuming work like this, because you have got all these clips and various things on the frame that you don't necessarily get on a modern bike. Modern bikes are thought out a little bit better than a bike of this nature. So we have to remove all these clips and clean them all up. Take hours and hours to clean and to sort out and pick the best ones and get them looking nice on the bike again. So it can be very time consuming, a restoration of this nature, but it's what we do at Bike Speed, so we'll get all these parts off the bike. These clips thankfully were still there for the rear brake. Even though we had no cable, the clips were there, which was actually a bonus for us with this bike. Now we're actually going to be replacing this saddle with a nice leather Brooks saddle, Old England on an Old England bike. We'll just set the bike off nicely and present it and finish it really well. So we're now removing the cables that are left on the bike. So this Sturmey Archer cable comes out as well. We'll be replacing that. I'm going to show you how we do that as well. Off come the handlebar grips. We're going to clean those up, and then also the brake levers, we'll clean those up and lubricate those as best we can. And then we had a little problem with this shifter here for the Sturmey Archer. The little 3-speed actuator was seized solid, so I tried a little bit of WD-40 there to help the threads along the way, but I still couldn't turn it, and the head of that was a little bit gnarled up from a previous attempt, so I actually just sawed that head a little bit deeper just so I could get a bit more purchase with a slightly flatter screwdriver. And you can see there that I actually managed to undo that, and that enables us to reuse that shifter, and we can actually get it off the bike to clean it up, put it through the ultrasonic cleaner and lubricate it before it goes back on the bike. So all these little problems you get along the way that you have to solve, you have to keep figuring them out. Now this front light, although it was a battery operated or dynamo operated light originally, it had no cables out of it, but we just liked that. It just set the bike off, so we are actually going to put that back on the bike, even though it has no cables, no batteries, nothing in it, it's not working, but it's just a nice little touch and a part of the original part of the bike. And you can see here I could not remove the handlebars. They were absolutely seized well into the steerer tube, so I actually put the front wheel back on the bike just to help me get some leverage on that to actually remove it, and out it popped, and you can see there's quite a bit of rust at the bottom of that, which again we'll clean off to get it back into the bike. So thankfully they came out, and now you can see we're almost back at the frame. So next thing I'm going to do is start preparing items to clean in the ultrasonic cleaner and to also lubricate. So we need to go through all these parts. Now with the calipers, I'm going to be replacing the brake blocks, so we took those off straight away, and then in go the parts we're going to be ultrasonic cleaning. This gets a nice deep clean right deep into the components. It vibrates the solution through the components and really lifts off any of the dirt or debris, but most noticeably in the areas you just cannot get to with your hands and with rags and everything else. And then what I'm going to do with the chrome parts is, you can see here I'm using wire wool to really work into those and to clean off the rust as well. Rust tends to bleed out, so you'll get a little spot of rust, and as it gets wet it will bleed out and will actually look 3 or 4 times the size that it actually is, and you can clean around that and bring it back. And I just find that wire wool really makes these parts pop out without scratching it. It's softer than the metal that you're actually dealing with, so it cleans these parts up. You can get the rust off as best as possible, and it makes the parts really present nicely, and the chrome really stands out once I've cleaned them like this. So you can see here the caliper, which we're actually going to do a little bit more work on, which I'll show you. They're cleaning up nicely. We're getting all that black and dirt and debris off that was on there previously. And I'm also using a fresh bit of wire wool here on the actual handlebar grips themselves. These are the original grips, so they're very nice, and they're actually quite a rare thing to, if you want to buy a set of these, they're quite hard to find anything as original as that. Now I'm just going to show you here how we can really clean up parts with our polishing mop here. You can see the brownness on that. This is actually the top of the kickstand, so I'm just polishing that now. I've put some polish onto the mop there. I'm just cleaning it off, and you can see there how it brings it back to the metal finish. The patina's still there, but the reflective part there is really nicely cleaned without that rust really digging into the part, and it can really bring them up nicely. So I'll do the same here with the kickstand to show you what a difference this makes. Now, a lot of these parts on the bike we've done this with, even though we may not have shown all of them when we're filming, but it just really makes the part and the bike present really, really nicely. And it's just subtle because you've still got the original patina there, you've still got that browning off of the metal through age, but the rust and the top surface is gone, and it really brings the parts back up. So this is one of the brake calipers. Obviously we're going to put fresh brake blocks onto the calipers. We don't want that old rubber on the bike. I don't mind replacing these pinch bolts and the adjuster at the top. It's a little bit of a cheat code for me, but they're still available. They are almost identical to the originals, and they can really make these restorations pop out without really replacing the part. I like original patina restorations like this, where we have an old mechanical part that's been serviced and is working perfectly like a new part, so the whole bike ends up feeling like a brand new bike. When you ride it up the road, it feels tight, taut, everything's working nicely, and yet underneath you have this old vintage bike that hasn't been over restored, that you can really be proud to ride and still looks like an original bike, and yet when you're riding it, it's perfect. And that's what I like to do, is make them mechanically perfect. This is the actuator here for the Sturmey Archer gear. We're using our grease stand there with our syringes, general purpose grease there, some general purpose oil, and some copper anti-seize grease on the threads. Absolutely perfect. And then I'm going to deal with the pedals here. There was a lot of movement in these. Initially I thought it was bearings, but these were very, very unusual pedals in that they are actually a collar and a sleeve. There were no bearings in them whatsoever. So the play that I had in this pedal wasn't through bearings being worn out, it was just where the spacing on the clip that holds them was a little bit off, so we dealt with that. So put these through the ultrasonic cleaner. You can see how they're coming up nicely now. I'm going to clean these out, dry them off, and then I'm going to re-grease them and put a different washer on the end of them. So everything there's good. The shaft here needs a good clean up as well, so I'm wire brushing this one to get that rust that was on there. It was actually quite tight to pull out, so we want to make sure that that was okay to go back in. So I'm greasing the sleeve here that goes into the pedal, and then I will put the axle back into that pedal. And then you can see here on the right hand side, instead of one washer, I've got two. They're brand new, and then a brand new clip on there, and that actually took out most of the play in that pedal. And after I finished this bike, I actually rode it up the road to see what these pedals felt like. You would never know there was no bearings in them. They were smooth as butter under your feet. Quite an unusual design. They were original Raleigh pedals. They had the Raleigh logo on the rubbers, and they're now sorted and ready to go back on the bike. Next up, I'm going to deal with this hub. So initially I'm going to take it all apart, everything through the ultrasonic cleaner, re-lubricate, put it back together, and we will get this absolutely perfect. Now, an unusual thing about these hubs, the Sturmey Archer 3-speed hubs like this and many other Sturmey Archers, is they're all date stamped, and it's a great way to date a bike, assuming that it has the original wheel on it. Most of these bikes like this clearly is the original wheel of this bike, and the date stamp on this was 74. So this is a 1974 bike, which means this bike is over 50 years old. So it's amazing that you can take a bike that's 50 years old, and through servicing alone and a little bit of love and care, you can bring them back up and get them back on the road, riding like the day they left the factory. Really, really is a credit to the engineering involved, especially in something like this 3-speed hub, and the engineering involved with the rest of the bike, that you can bring them so nicely back to life. Amazing for a 50-plus-year-old bike. Anyway, here I'm replacing the bearings. These are the hub bearings here, so they're coming out with a magnet. Just enables me to pull them all out at once. That little cover comes off because we will clean that. And then these Sturmey Archers have this lock ring on them, which we need to undo to actually get the hub out of the wheel hub itself, the body of the hub. So out that comes now, and that enables us to then clean the wheel and do our work there. But we've also got these main wheel bearings here with this little cover on them as well on the non-drive side, so we pop that cover off. And this must have had bearings at some point. I don't think these would have ever come with a bearing race like that. I think they always came with loose bearings, so this has been serviced in its life, but many years ago, no doubt, for a 50-year-old bike. I'm taking all these little components apart now on this hub. There's quite a few here. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to get these apart and back together in the correct order, but there's plenty of diagrams out there, so if ever I got stuck I could always refer to one of those, but I've done enough of these now to know the order that everything goes back together. Out comes the wheel bearings from the drive side there, and then I'm going to put all these components through the ultrasonic cleaner, get all that old grease and oil off them. These should be oiled so they never build up too badly, but they still need a good clean out. And then this little leather strap in there, these are in the axles designed to stop the grease building up inside them. They're part of the original bike on this one, so I'm going to put those back on, but taking it off does enable me to clean the wheel hub inside and out so that I can get everything clean before I put that back on. Cleaning it inside here now to make sure everything there is right, and you can see how beautiful these hubs come up. These Sturmey Archer hubs all clean up like this. They really do come up nice. Thing of past engineering, really. Now I'm going to concentrate on the wheel for a little bit. I'm going to clean the actual rim of the wheel and check the spokes and clean those. So again, I'm using wire wool. The braking surface on this wasn't brilliant, but it's had 50 years of braking, and once it's being reused, that will probably clean up a little bit just by regular use of a brake. But the wheels like this are very hard to find, and again, this is an original patina restoration, so I don't see any point in replacing those wheels. They work perfectly. Now I'm putting in the hub bearings here. You can see there's a row of bearings. This supports the free hub itself, or the hub body of the Sturmey Archer. So these aren't the wheel bearings, these are the hub bearings. And then there's a little cover that I'm going to knock onto there. This actually stops them bearings falling out as well if you do it at this stage, so we can pop that on. Then this is the drive side wheel bearings that I'm putting in now. You can see there I'm using our premium grease. This is a very nice grease because it will hold the bearings against gravity as I put them in, and also is a nice buttery grease which gives a lovely smooth wheel when you are actually using it day to day. So it's the perfect grease for this kind of work. And again, here we're now putting the non-drive side wheel bearings, and you can see how that holds that above and against gravity, so really makes doing jobs like this very easy. Now with the hub components themselves, everything here needs to be wet. The hub has a oil hole in it, so you should always be oiling the hub regularly as part of your routine of riding a bike like this. Sort of the daily maintenance of a bike like this is to oil the hub. So we want to put it back together with a nice oil, and we want to make sure that everything here is wet. So I'm oiling the Planet wheels here. I'm making sure that they're all oiled and wet in their shafts, and the pawls that are on here, there's actually two sets of pawls on this wheel. And then I'm just dusting it with a spray of oil as well to make sure, like I say, that everything is nice and wet when it goes back together, so that it will actuate and run and operate nicely. There's a little pin here that's always a bit of a fiddle. That's actually what the actuator winds into when you put that back in the wheel once it's on the bike. I'm doing this against gravity, so I'm putting it in the vise and everything then drops onto it and sits where it needs to be. Doesn't make it very hard for me. It's a nice easy way of doing this in the vise. On goes them hub bearings there, you can see, so we're gradually building this up like the jigsaw puzzle that I mentioned. In goes the spring, on goes the wheel bearings, and then obviously you've got the centre there that adjusts. Now this side you can actually adjust those wheel bearings off the bike, so you can actually do the final adjustment on the non-drive side, so we can actually get that dead right before we actually put it in the bike. I'm also going to put a little bit of anti-seize grease on the threads that hold this onto the hub body, just so that it will make it easier to thread in and thread out in future, and on that goes. And then we've just got to obviously lock that lock ring off that I mentioned before. Then we can put the non-drive side wheel bearing together and make sure that we've then got it adjusted perfectly so. And you can see there how the hub of this is cleaned up, how the spokes have cleaned up, how the wheel rim's cleaned up. Everything on this wheel is looking amazing. Using a little bit of general purpose grease there before I put the main single cog onto the bike. You can actually alter the gearing a little bit by using different sizes of these, but I'm putting the original one back on, and then this rather fiddly clip often takes many attempts to get those on, but that goes on nicely. So everything there is now absolutely spot on, freshly serviced, freshly lubricated, and where it wasn't changing gear when it came in, as soon as we put the actuator in, everything's changing gear nicely. So putting that original leather back on there as well, why not? And then I'm going to start on the tyres. So off comes the old tyre. I actually replaced both the tyres on this. These probably would have survived, in all honesty. They weren't too bad, but with an old bike like this, I think new rubber is never a problem. It's always a good practice, really. Now I could see there was quite a bit of rust under the wheel rim tape there, and so I removed that, and then I'm going to clean this off with a wire brush just to get that surface rust off of there. It's on the back of the spokes as well. I was a little bit concerned that the nipples may be too rusty on the spokes, but actually it brushed off and it was just a very almost like a surface dust of rust, so it wasn't too bad. And then I'm putting fresh canvas tape over the top of that, rather replacing it with fresh canvas tape. That will then be ready for the new tyre, but I do have to just poke a hole through it for the valve, so I just use a screwdriver to do that. So on goes our new tyre. Now this is not a metric size tyre, it's an imperial tyre, 26 by inch and 3/8. So I'm actually using a 27.5 inch inner tube here, because I find they go in a lot easier than a 26 inch tube. So that's a 27.5 in there. Everything there is good. Inflate it, and that wheel is now absolutely ready to go back on the bike, with the exception of the fact that we just need to retension it. Now you can see here all the red triangles there are spokes that are either too tight or too loose. We need a more even tension across both sides of the wheel, and actually I was amazed how close I got this wheel. It really came up nicely. You can see a graphical display there on the left of how it was, and then by getting it nice you can see how even and smooth I got that both left and right of the wheel. So this wheel was really nice when it went back on the bike, so very happy with that. I'm also going to replace the headset bearings. I like with a restoration like this to do all the bearings that are on the bike. So we're going to clean up the components, the cups and everything that go on the forks, and then remove these old bearings, get rid of those and put fresh bearings in. Out they come from both the bottom race and the top race. Then we will clean those up. So we're just using a little bit of degreaser spray here, again with a little bit of wire wool. These cups weren't perfect, but they're still good enough. We're not racing this bike, we're using it on a Sunday, maybe to go to the pub or maybe to go to the shops. This is the sort of thing this bike would be used for, so the headset bearings will still feel buttery smooth compared with how they did. So we'll clean all those up and get new bearings in there. Steerer tube, we're also going to clean the threads there with a wire brush to make it easier for us to put it all back together. You can see there the rust in the solution there on the bench pooling away. Fresh premium grease, same as with the wheels. So in go the new bearings, nice row of bearings there, a little bit of premium grease over the top of them, and everything there will be ready to go back on. And the same with this top cup. I love using these syringes for these, especially on these old bikes where you're putting the bearings in like this. It's just so smooth and easy to use, and you just pour that round and it looks lovely. We do have a website. It's a way we support our own channel and the way you can support us. So a lot of the items that we use on the channel we do sell on our website. We always put the link in the description below, so please do check that out. So a lot of items that we've used today will be on there and they will help with your restorations, and it's a way we can help each other. So please do check out our website and maybe place an order at some point when you're doing your next restoration. Now I'm just turning my attention to the handlebars before we put those back into those forks that we've put together. So again, a little bit of wire wool, a little bit of cleaning before we put those back on. And now I'm just using a snow foam spray in a bottle to wet the frame down. It helps lift off the grease and dirt, and then I'm using a detailing brush to work my way around the bike to lift off that dirt and to clean down the frame. And because these are a nice soft brush, they're not going to scratch it. We can work our way around. It just feels nice using this, and it's just nice to work your way through, check the lugs, clean everything, clean that bottom bracket area, really work our way around the bike. You can see how I work front to back, cleaning all the tubes and making sure that everything is really nice, and everything there is now spot on. And now we're just going to clean that final grease debris out from that bottom bracket area. using again one of our brushes that's available on our website. So just clean that out with some nice water, get all that grease out. You can see there how it's pulling out and sticking to the brush and cleaning away. And then again, just the detailing brush and some warm soapy water to wash that away before we wipe down the bike so everything there is clean. And now I'm just using a microfiber towel. Microfiber towels are nice because they're very, very soft and they will lift off that water, lift off any debris that is on the bike, but again, because they're soft, they won't damage the bike. I'm going to use some of our super resin polish here to polish this frame. This is an amazing polish. It's a very, very premium product in the sense of that it gives a lovely shine to these bikes and this kind of work and this kind of paint, but also gives a lovely protection to it. And what I find is after I've washed these bikes down, they often feel to the touch a little bit grainy, a little bit matte. You can almost feel that matteness in your fingers. Your fingers are very sensitive to this kind of finish. But once I've polished it, you can begin to feel how smooth, how shiny it is. You can feel that in your fingers and you can see it in the paintwork. You can see this reflection building up. And then once I've done that, I use our rapid ceramic spray. And this is the game changer of the whole work. Once you've sprayed a bike with this and polished it down, so you initially spray it on, then I'm buffing it again here with a microfiber towel. I really work that in. This doesn't really do justice the amount of work we put into buffing these off. But once you've done that, you've almost got like to the fingers, it feels almost plasticky. It feels so smooth, so shiny, and it really repels the water very, very nicely. And water absolutely pulls up on it in little droplets that you can just wipe straight off. And obviously it protects the frame, protects the paint, moving down the line between servicing and between cleaning your bike. And it's the same principle here on the mudguard. So I've washed that down. I'm using our super resin polish to polish it, and then our ceramic spray to protect it between washing it next time and this time. So buffing that off, and you can see there the reflection on that old paint. You don't need to repaint it to really make that bike feel like it's a completely different condition to how it was before the restoration. So just straightening up these mudguard stays here. It'll just sit nicer on the bike and obviously present the bike a little bit better than how it was. And then I'm also going to deal with the chain guard as well. So we've done everything here that was blue that's painted with the resin polish and with the ceramic spray. And you can see there the reflection on that top surface, how even this has really come up nicely. It's nicely protected now, so the rusty areas or the areas that have lost their paint will be protected with this to a degree, so it won't deteriorate as long as it's treated carefully in the future. There are a few dents on this, so I'm just knocking those out and flattening those back off. There are actually 3 or 4 along there that just made it ripple, and we've just sorted those out as well. And then we can now turn our attention to the bottom bracket and putting the new bearings in here. So we put our premium grease in the cup, and then go the new bearings and a second layer of premium grease over the top of those, and that cup is now ready to go in. I'm using a little bit of our anti-seize grease here on the threads of the bottom bracket to help that cup spin into the frame. And you can see there, when you think we were using spanners and clamps and things to undo that, how much easier it is once the threads are all cleaned out and greased nicely to get this all back together. So in goes the axle there, and on goes the second cup, and then the lock ring on top of that. So I do that by hand and by feel, and then just lock that off, and that bearing is now ready to have the chain set put on. A little bit easier for me to put this kickstand on while there's nothing in the way, so I put this on before I put the chain set on, just to make it easier for myself really. So on goes that right hand chain set, and on goes that brand new cotter pin, and you can see there that the cotter pin is nicely nipped up, and drilling out the old one is no ill effect to the chain set itself, and everything there goes back together nicely. And we're going to put the pedals on. We're using again a little bit of anti-seize grease inside there, because obviously that left hand pedal was absolutely almost at the point of being seized solid and was quite arduous to get out. And look at the difference here for putting it back in. So that's as easy as it went in. What a difference just by cleaning and lubricating. Little spin test here for you. You can see how that's spinning. It absolutely span for ages. So Simon sped this up 2 times for the video just because it was spinning too long and it would have been boring watching it. You can see there What a joy, you know, what a difference you can make to these bikes with servicing alone. Everything there is now absolutely spot on. Lovely bearings in there, everything flowing nicely. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the shaft of these forks because they were hard to get out, and that will just help next time removing them. And obviously with this quill type stem, there's no need to worry about them moving with one of those. It will be absolutely solid. On goes that front light that we mentioned before. A little bit of a detail of the original bike that maybe we will never be able to actually reinstate, but at least it looks nice on the front there. On goes the right hand parts that are going onto the handlebars. We're actually using a little bit of hairspray there to bind that grip back onto the handlebars before locking off the brake and the shifter there. And then it'll be the same on the left, and then we can put the front brake on. So everything's going on nicely now. So we tighten up that front brake, and you can see with the fittings that we replaced on there and the new brake blocks, everything there is looking good. And on goes the rear mudguard as well, along with that rear brake caliper. So at this stage of the game, we've solved most of the problems that we're going to receive with this bike. It becomes a bit of a joyous thing really when you start to put a bike like this back together, because everything's clean, you're not getting dirty hands, everything's now lubricated, so it's all going back together nicely, the threads are all working. This is the satisfaction part of a job like this, where you really know you're getting on with it and everything almost becomes easy at this stage. So it really is very satisfying when you start putting a bike like this back together. Now we've got the big chunky chain here. This is an 1/8 chain, not a 3/32. So it's a big heavy duty single speed chain. So we're using a new one here. This is an anti-corrosion chain, so it's not likely to rust like the old one did. And then we put in the actuator here for the rear gears. At this stage the chain is a little bit slack. We'll adjust that once we've got everything back together. We can then adjust the rear actuation of the rear gears as well. Putting a brand new cable in here because they do get a bit cruddy and messy inside the outer, so putting a new cable into this one. And these actually have a universal end here, so this end is slightly different to what come off the bike. We've got a slightly different fit in there, which enables us to cut the cable where originally the cables are pre-fitted into the center of the piece that goes onto the actuation. In this case we're just going to cut this cable off and put a tail on the end of this, and it will work perfectly, and it's just slightly different, but it's a serviceable item, and that's the way we achieve that with that one. Next up, I'm going to put on the clips for the pump. Even though we don't have a pump on this one, these clips would have been original to the bike. I've seen a few of these Wayfarers and they all have these pump clips on them, so we want to keep that on there, and maybe at some point in the future a pump will go back on the frame, but at least with those there it can. On goes the brake cables. Now these are actually wired European, so in the UK normally we have the right hand brake would be the front brake and the left hand brake would be the rear, but with this bike it's the other way around, which is what most of our European viewers would see. So this is the way we're putting this one on. Got a little tail end guide there that makes our tail ends the same length, so we'll use that both front and rear brake to make sure that the tail ends are the same length. And then those clips, which thankfully were on the bike, actually polished up quite nicely. You can see there, lovely reflection on those ones. And then we can adjust the front brake as well. So we've got the new adjusters there, the new pads, the guide there to cut the cable the same length as the rear, and everything there is now absolutely spot on and ready for its journey moving forwards. I'm also now going to put a new clip onto this chain guard, so on goes that front one first. I find it easier to do that than the rear one, so get that roughly in its right place, and then we can put the rear one on, and that will then sit nicely on the frame. And you can see there the reflection of the blue and the lovely depth of shine and polish that we got on there. Replacing the saddle with a leather brook saddle. This has got the lovely chrome springs on it, really nice. Now listen to this. How satisfying. Lovely gear change. Brakes working beautifully. Lovely sound of the bearings. Taps from the leather in the hub, and the wheels and brakes are spinning beautifully and working. And the front headset bearings moving, flowing beautifully. What a thing of joy. So that's our restoration for this week. I think you'll agree we've transformed this bike from unrideable to as new mechanically. The paint came up great despite all the rust. We got a great depth of colour, which is better than I expected. The chrome components came up great as well, and it's a testament of the manufacturing of the time and the highlight of this bike. So if you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe. Please check out our online store using the link in the description. That's the best way to support the channel. So that's the restoration complete. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.